Good morning, and welcome to our continuing series on homeopathy with our beloved Dr. Pachegaonkar. Namaste. We have about a few subjects to cover today in detail, and the first one I'd like to talk about is something that is very common, fever. Can you enlighten us on how homeopath
So
treats
fever,
fever?
fever is not a disease itself. It is a symptom of a disease. Rather, fever is indicator of defense getting roused in our body against some infection. So fever is essentially a defensive phenomena. And by studying the pattern of fever, you can guess like what must be the background which has given rise to fever. For example, in malaria, it will be intermittent fever. There will be phase of chills, heat, that is fever, and then perspiration, and person will have normal temperature
Oh, so it goes down to normal,
to near normal,
near
and
normal,
again
and then
it
again.
rises
Yeah.
periodically. So this is typical malarial fever. Whereas there is a recurrent fever where fever will never come to normal. It may rise a little bit by evening, but it will not come to normal, and gradually it will go on progressing in degree. That can be, say, in enteric fever, typhoid. There can be a viral fever where there would be a sudden rise of temperature, and person may run it for few days even, and then it will come down. So depending upon the pattern of fever, we have to diagnose the underlying condition and then treat the fever.
What about fever in small children? We often see it in very young children.
Yes, well, in children also, many times we have those what we call eruptive illnesses, eruptive fever, like measles, chicken pox, where without fever, the exanthematous eruptions will not erupt on the body. So in that case, if you suppress fever with antipyretic medicines, now in modern medicine you have medicines which can lower down fever without bothering like why it has been there. So if you interfere with that, then the eruptive fever, the measles, chicken pox doesn't come out. So in children, commonest are like earlier they used to be. Nowadays we don't have that opportunity because we are immunizing children unnecessarily against measles and chicken pox.
Unnecessarily.
Unnecessarily, because what happens, measles and chicken pox, if they are managed well without medicine, they will not be fatal. So but if the child comes down with measles or chicken pox in early childhood, the child develops immunity against so many viral disorders.
In the future.
So, in long run, these childhood illnesses like measles, chicken pox, mumps, they are very much beneficial to the system, and children are deprived of it. So is even polio. The polio infection generally passes off in a subclinical phase. Little bit of diarrhea and low grade fever child will develop, and in 3-4 days child will develop immunity against polio. Only danger is during that period, if the child gets prick either in the form of injection or some thorn prick or pin prick, then the post polio paralysis comes. Can you imagine in India and all over, last 30 years we have been struggling with polio, so-called polio eradication, with mass immunization and large scale. India must have spent more than 1 lakh crore rupees in that. But as such, polio is not a fatal disease. Only thing is the complication of polio is post polio paralysis. which is again only in the event of having prick during that infection. So if 1 lakh children get affected by polio, they just pass off that condition in a subclinical phase. Little bit of loose motion and fever, and then it gets cured and there is immunity. Whereas this polio vaccination itself has caused so many deaths because of, see, it's very difficult to maintain that attenuation in vaccination. That potency has to be, the cold chain has to be maintained to keep the potency of that vaccination. So that is very difficult to manage. So suppose like there is a chance that one child in 1 million is going to get post polio paralysis. But 1 million children you are going to vaccinate with polio for at least 5 years. They go on giving doses up to 5 years of age, and that has more toxicity than the incidence of polio itself. So fever, whenever one gets, one should not take it negatively. It's definitely a indicator of defense of the system getting roused. So we have to just understand the phenomena which is in the background and then treat it. But till then, during fever, there are few requisites we can follow. One is rest, because if fever is there, there would be again accompanying toxicity and body ache and allied ailments, where person will not be vulnerable and will not exert. Whereas if you give antipyretic and no fever, person will again be vulnerable if that fever is suppressed. So we suggest that fever, if it is there, you take it as indicator, study it, but take rest. Then ample of fluid you have to drink, because that itself helps body to keep hydrated well. Then body will emit lot of urine, that also will help. There should be enough scope to sweat, so good rehydration has to be there. Plus you should be very light in food, because if you eat heavy food, that will be again an additional exertion for the body. So keep yourself in low profile. If you have fever, take complete rest, drink lot of fluid, and have a light food. This is what you should do, and then study the phenomena, and after studying the pattern of fever, then you can remedy it. And nowhere you should rush for antibiotics, because if fever is viral origin and if you give antibiotics, it is going to linger longer. It is an interference.
Wow. Thank you so much.